Hey, it's hammer time. Today we have mi amigo, mi hermano. I'm still working on mi español, so I apologize. Jaime Molera. Jaime, welcome to the show.
It's an honor to be here. I've been a big fan of Hammer Time, and finally being able to be on it's an honor. It really is.
Well, it was an honor to be on your show several times, so I have to admit, this is the first time I'm actually a little bit nervous.
Oh, is that right? Well, no, you don't have to.
It feels like you should be asking me the questions, not the other way around. But I want to start by saying I'm here with Arizona's youngest statesman. The way you conduct yourself and the way you're able to bridge two incredibly important issues in our state, education and our state's economy, there's no one who brings what you bring to the table when it comes to those critical issues. What I wanted to start with is just ask, what do you think? Education remains a top issue. On a 30,000-foot level, how do we move forward, keeping the economy going, but getting more investment into our educational system?
I really believe that we need to be laser focused on giving all kids, regardless of where they live, access to a quality education. And that means that we are going to have a meaningful accountability system. We're certainly going to have the significant dollars behind it, but it has to be coupled together. My concern has been, over the last few years, you're getting a lot of organizations and groups that just want to throw money at the issue and think that that's the fertilizer that something good is going to grow. But as you know, it has to be a combination of things. It has to be combined with strong economic development as well as a quality school system.
Well, the process that we go about this is important. And I'd like you to talk about, you were one of the architects and the leaders in Proposition 301, which not only passed by voters, but as important, this past legislative session was embraced by basically every legislator and a 20-year extension signed by Governor Ducey. Can you talk a little bit about 301, the process, and the sort of the thinking behind that landmark initiative?
I found it a little ironic because when we were going through and getting it passed back in 2000, it was a haul. I mean, you and I have been in a lot of fights too, and Medicaid being one of them, and it was very similar to that. We were in special session. The governor called him into a special session, Governor Jane Hull, and we were in session for over a month, and it was deadlocked. But
it was a referendum, so it was referred.
It was referred, but it was 100% of the legislative focus was just on that issue. The thing that made that powerful, and I think what made it last 20 years later, that got the legislature almost unanimously to say we need to extend it, is that it was done in a way that had very strong business interests engaged in that. So it wasn't just an edu-centric type of a plan.
And bipartisan, too, wasn't it?
Very much bipartisan. You had a lot of input from, at the time, people like Bob McClendon, who was the minority leader in the House of Representatives, had a big piece in the crafting of that legislation. And so one of the things that I think made it effective is that you had that very strong business engagement coupled with experts in the education field and really made it meaningful. Something that wasn't a part of this last education go around, and I think that's why those things are problematic.
Well, you came out and led the effort, the successful effort against the so-called Invest in Ed. It was really an income tax scheme that would have weakened some of the 301 reforms. You'd maybe talk a little bit about that. I mean, you came on board and just led a very successful effort.
The thing that 301 did that people forgot is that we said very clearly those dollars are specifically for teachers, right? And not a dime went to administration. This initiative would have obliterated that. It would have just spread it across all categories of a school district, and it wasn't as focused on teacher pay. And the other thing, it had absolutely zero accountability attached to it. So you would have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and the question was, well, what is it going to get us? And Glenn, the answer was, we don't know. It was just going to throw a lot of money at it without any kind of accountabilities attached to it.
And another concern, and you represent a lot of different business interests as well, is what it would do to our state's economy, what it would have done, taking our individual income tax, basically doubling it, and really just walloping our small business community.
It would have thrown a wet blanket over our red hot economy. Right now, I think Governor Ducey has done yeoman's work in leading the charge to figuring out how do you hit that sweet spot of focusing on investments that we need to as a state, right? Whether it's K-12 education, higher education, infrastructure that needs to be dealt with. But at the same time, how do you make sure that our economic engine is humming along? And one of the things that I think we should be very proud of as a state is that no other state can really match our job growth. The capital investment that's coming from other states into Arizona. People want to invest in Arizona. Not just move companies here, but actually invest in the companies we have now. And as you know, as a head of a chamber, that leads to a lot of great things, including the revenue sources that we're going to need for long-term infrastructure.
Well, speaking of our red-hot economy, a big part of that has been our model relationship with Mexico. And that's an area where you and Molera Alvarez, your firm, have been leading the charge for a number of years. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship and the importance to the Arizona economy with our friends from Mexico?
So that was an effort that was started, and a lot of credit has to go to now Congressman Greg Stanton, who was then Mayor Greg Stanton, who led the charge to create a trade office. The city of Phoenix started this several years back. And I think the fruit of that investment and really planting the seeds of long-term relationships with Mexico is very important. As you know, Mexico is our largest trading partner. Sometimes I think we've taken them for granted. But I think then Mayor Stanton was very aggressive on that front. I think it laid the groundwork for Governor Ducey and what he's done to really further those relationships. And if you look at what's happening with long-term trade that's starting to boom, it's not just the typical agricultural, because we've always had strong agricultural, but it's manufacturing,
aerospace, the Lucid Motors.
Absolutely. All of those types of initiatives.
Tourism.
Oh, tourism has been magnificent. I mean, the tourism dollars that we're getting from Mexico is massive. And as you know, one of the things that Arizona's been on the cusp of is leading the charge of why trade is a good thing. Free trade has been, unfortunately, has been disparaged. And that's something that we just need to continue to build our relationship as a state, but make the argument with the federal government that we need to be at the forefront, not be falling back on protectionist policies that don't do anything.
Amen. And you and your team have done a great job of bringing together chambers, other trade groups across Arizona to really make the case for trade, to the point where arguably, Arizona has been a model for other states in terms of how the business community could come together to support free trade.
Right. You know, free trade is something that it's a good thing. And because when people talk about tariffs are taxes, right? And taxes tend to dampen productivity, and I'm not a big believer that taxes lead to good things.
Getting to Nogales, I just want to talk a little bit about that, because it's a border community, and you know, a relationship with Mexico, to me, one of the things that struck me as a guy who's come out here from New York, that it's beyond commerce, it's beyond its culture, it's family. And Nogales, you could have family on both sides of the border. There's
no doubt about that. And the other thing that's special about Nogales, and I'm very proud of, there never was a sense, even though we came from very modest means, and most kids, of course, growing up in Nogales come from modest means, there's never a sense of feeling that they're underprivileged, right? There's a belief, and if you look at the community's test scores, and Nogales I'm very proud of the fact that they have tremendous test scores, and the Chamber Foundation has highlighted that.
That for our A for Arizona schools,
yeah.
Some of the schools are just off the charts.
And one of the things that I think people should look at as an example, communities where they might not have the wealthiest homeowners, and they may not have all the capital and all the major business, but when there's a focus on achievement and outcomes, and really setting a standard that regardless of where you come from, you can get to that next level. You can get a strong higher education. We have a great university system. We have a great community college system. But kids need to believe that they can get to that next level. And not just believe it, you have to have teachers and parents that will push them at every level to get to there. And that's where I think Nogales, there's always been that sense of we're not less than anybody. And maybe it was a chip on our shoulder, but it's something that I think is real, and that we need to foster throughout the state.
A lot of different areas we could go in, but I wanted to close. One of my favorite areas, we've got just an incredible tourism sector. I mean, I don't care where you are in the world. When you talk about Arizona, our resorts, our tourism sector, these are the best ambassadors for the state of Arizona. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that industry and the importance to Arizona's economy?
The Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, under the leadership of Kim Sabo,
Love Kim Sabo.
has been just phenomenal. But it's a 1-2 punch, because you have Kim leading the association, then you have somebody like Debbie Johnson, that is the governor's tourism director.
She's outstanding.
That does an outstanding work. And one of the things that they've done is worked with a number of organizations to not take for granted things like, for instance, the Cactus League, right? The Cactus League has been phenomenal for Arizona.
When I was a kid growing up in New York, the one thing I really knew about Arizona as a baseball fan was the Cactus League.
That's exactly right.
And I wanted to come out to Arizona, in large part because of it.
And if you look at what Arizona has done in order to invest in that kind of infrastructure, we've been able to attract a lot of teams that have come here. So where it used to be Cactus League, or excuse me, the springtime baseball was kind of all over the place, it's now centered around Florida and Arizona, and we dominate those areas. And I think you have even more teams that would like to come to Arizona. That tourism and that engagement with our state tends to bring people not just back here for tourism, but they want to come work here. They want to bring businesses here. And that's what's led to this phenomenal growth that we have, and why Arizona is, in my opinion, the best state in the union.
I can't argue with that. On that note, Jaime Molera, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Glenn, as always, it's an honor.
Thank you.